Good morning, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Zellerbach Hall. I'm Jeremy Geffen. I'm the Executive and Artistic Director for Cal Performances, and we feel so fortunate to have you all with us and to be able to partner with the Black Studies Collaboratory at UC Berkeley for this morning's panel discussion. And I'm going to actually turn this over to someone who is far more knowledgeable and far more personable than myself, Professor Lee Rayford, who is the director of the Black Studies Collaboratory.
I'll lower this a little bit. Good morning. Good morning. I'm so excited to see you all here. My name is Lee Rayford, and I'm a professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies here at UC Berkeley, and I am the director and co-PI with Professor Tiana Espichel of the Black Studies Collaboratory. The Collaboratory is a recipient, of a Mellon Foundation's Just Future grant, which is a collaborative initiative to address racial inequality through bold and unique humanities-based research projects. We are thrilled to be partnering with Cal Performances on today's event, which also happens to be the first of 10 events organized by the Abolition Democracy Fellows Program of the Collaboratory. You can find out more about our spring series in flyers that are downstairs at the entrance, as well as at our website, blackstudiescollab.berkeley.edu. So we are gathering here today in person at the Zellerbach Hall mezzanine here at UC Berkeley. This campus is sited on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. We acknowledge and pay respect to Muwekma Ohlone ancestors, peoples today, and the Muwekma Ohlone future to come. In acknowledging the Ohlone history of this land, we acknowledge that the Ohlone people are thriving members of the Berkeley community who are actively imagining more just futures and engaging the tools that are needed to do that imaginative work. So whether you are joining us from Ohlone land, from elsewhere on Turtle Island, or beyond, thank you for being with us today, and a special shout out to my parents in Atlanta who are on the live stream. The Black Studies Collaboratory is committed to amplifying the world-building work of Black Studies, and the Abolition Democracy Fellows Program is a centerpiece of the Collaboratory. Since September, the 15 fellows in our program, ages 20 to 76, artists and academics from a range of disciplines, speaking multiple languages at various stages in their careers, gathered weekly with care and audacity, with wonder and joy, to envision alternative presents and futures. The fellows curated this 10-event series, and we invite you all into this shared space of critical engagement and collaborative imagining. Now, creating the conditions of care where people can dream big is hard work. It's hard collective work. So before I turn it over to the luminous Ra Malika Imhotep, curator and moderator of today's event, Tiana Espichel and I want to thank all of those folks who have made today possible. Black Studies Collaboratory project manager extraordinaire, Barbara Montano. Our awesome Collaboratory graduate student assistant, Gilberto Rosa Duran. The Department of African American Studies, helmed brilliantly by Chair Professor Nikki Jones. Our incredible department administrative staff, Sandy Richmond, Maria Heredia, and reading room attendant department archivist, Francesco Araujo. We want to thank Cal Performances staff, especially Director Jeremy Geffen, Mina Girgis, and Rika Anderson. Thank you to Educational Technology Services for their incredible tech support. I want to thank our Spanish language interpreters, Marcy and Elena, in the back. If anyone needs Spanish language interpretation, there are devices for your use. We have to thank, of course, the Andrew Mellon Foundation. I want to thank the artists who are joining us today: Esperanza Spalding, Brontë Velez, Exene Sky, and Gallery of the Streets, Kai Lumumba Barrow, and Jazz Franklin, for making the time to be with us here today. I want to thank the ancestors who always walk with us. And I want to thank all of you who are here and masked at Zellerbach, and all of you joining us via YouTube. And I want to thank especially the curator and moderator of today's event, Abolition Democracy Dissertation Writing Fellow, Ra Malika Imhotep. From Atlanta, Georgia, Ra Malika is a Black feminist writer and performance artist, currently completing a PhD in African diaspora studies and new media studies here at UC Berkeley. As a scholar and cultural worker, Ra is invested in exploring relationships between queer Black femininities, Black vernacular cultures, and the performance of labor. As a steward of Black studies and Black feminist thought, Ra dreams, organizes, and facilitates spaces of critical reflection and embodied spiritual political education. Ra is a co-convener of the Church of Black Feminist Thought, an embodied spiritual political education project. Ra is also a member of the Black Aesthetic Curatorial Collective, and Ra is co-author of the Black Feminist Study Theory Atlas, which is available for sale at the Berkeley Art Museum bookstore, and author of Gossipine, forthcoming from Red Hun Press this spring. The Black Studies Collaboratory has been shaped profoundly by Ra's expansive practice, by their radiant intellect, and by their interdimensional vision. I'm absolutely thrilled that we are opening our Black Studies Collaboratory Spring Event Series with the performance of labor, the labor of performance, curated by Ra Malika Imhotep. Hand it over to you.
All right, hello everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I feel like I'm literally inside of a dream. So thank you all for being there with me. I guess I'm not hallucinating because there are witnesses. This is such an auspicious occasion, and that's a word that was enriched for me by the work of Brontë Velez. We are gathered here today in the wake of the ascension of funk luminary Betty Davis, following the birthday of Leontine Price, the birthday of Mary Lovelace O'Neal, and today, I just discovered, is Flo Kennedy's birthday. So we're just like in a season of Black feminist time marking, and I feel so honored to be gathering here in the wake of that legacy. In the essay, The Anarchy of Colored Girls Assembled in a Riotous Manner, Saidiya Hartman writes, "Survival required acts of collaboration and genius. The mutuality and creativity necessary to sustain life in the context of intermittent wages, controlled deprivation, economic exclusion, coercion, and anti-Black violence often bordered on the extra-legal and the criminal. Beautiful, wayward experiments entailed what W.E.B. Du Bois described as an open rebellion against society." And these creators, who will join me here shortly, come on down. Come on down. Anywhere you want. These creators gathered here today embody, express, and execute beautiful, wayward experiments that have reshaped the terrain of my own Black feminist thought and practice. Oh, man. I met Brontë at a distance, admiring the poetry of their words and that of their body as they blazed trails through Atlanta as a young spoken word poet and pre-professional dancer. We would become more formally acquainted when they joined me at Brandeis University in the second cohort of Posse scholars to be dispatched from Atlanta. and it was a true goddess blessing when upon graduation they flew westward to apprentice themselves to the work of permaculture and spiritual ecology. I met Exene on Twitter in or around 2016 and was quickly impressed by their embodied relationship to the work and legacy of Nina Simone. Since that very millennial beginning, I have been in constant awe of the world of sound they create and their angelic sense of self-fashioning. I have never met an artist and organizer who more ardently embodies Nina Simone's call to reflect the times through classic pianist skills, classic vocalist trainings, and just a whole world of loving imagination that tends to our living and our dying. Cayenne jazz of Gallery of the Streets swept me off my feet during a cacophony of sound and play, and ideas I was hungry for during an open rehearsal of their abolitionist global funk visual opera in Atlanta in 2018. During the convergence of the National Women's Studies Association, the American Studies Association, the 20th anniversary of Critical Resistance, and the 25th anniversary of Southerners on New Ground. After a visit with them at a tequila bar in New Orleans the following year, they invited me to join their Black Surrealist study group and were a big factor in my decision to reroute my dissertation route through the Dirty South via New Orleans. I have jokingly described my 2 years of field and feeling work in New Orleans as me defecting from the academy and joining a band of Black Surrealist Maroons. And Kai Lumumba Barrow is the conductor. I was brought into Esperanza's orbit by Brontë and their alchemy of community. Like many, if not all of you, her voice has, to quote Bell Hooks, tutored my heart. But in our encounters through Brontë, I have come to know and adore the curiosity of her spirit and the medicine of her genius. This gathering is a dream come true. Now, before I dive into my discussion prompts, and true to my grounding as a spiritual political education proponent, I would like to offer us all a moment to mindfully check in and enter this space of discussion together. If you are willing and able, I invite you to just take a moment to breathe. Maybe you breathe into your root. You can access that through the bottom of your feet or your seat. If it is accessible to you, I invite you to rub your hands together and produce some heat. And when you start to feel the work of that friction, offer that heat to wherever on your body needs it. And continue to breathe at your own pace. And now I invite you to take that heat to your heart and offer it to that part of yourself that so eagerly wants to be seen and known and heard. And say to that part, in your head or out loud, darling, I see you. Darling, I hear you. Darling, I love you. Darling, I am here with you. And may this sense of loving presence just hold us here as we journey together. As now I am in the driver's seat, putting on my conductor hat and guiding this beautiful convening of artists to discuss the contours of creative practice. Thank you. Okay, are we on? Well, welcome, everyone. I was telling everybody earlier that my true joy is just getting this group of people together, and I'm honored that we have witnesses, again, proof that it happened, that I'm not hallucinating. What happened? How do I do that? Okay, all set. Thank you. See, I appreciate you. So my first kind of question, or the first place I would like to anchor this journey, is just to ask you each, what is your work? And what, if any, lineages and traditions you feel a part of? Don't feel beholden to the seating order. No need for linear progression, but yeah, what is your work? And you can describe it in as abstract or concrete terms as you desire.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. I think on paper, I'm a pianist, I'm a vocalist, I am a composer. I think my work is releasing sound and emotion from my body. I think that's usually my primary function, and playing a lot with my own breath. I think I come from, as far as traditions, enslaved queer people. I think that's a big one. I feel like the slave is always present in my work, in my life, and I like need it to be. I don't want to live in a world where slavery is not at the forefront of what I'm doing, what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking. What else? I love how you mentioned Hartman and riotous, like, queer Black girls. I think that is also a big tradition and legacy for me as well. I think also, like, ancestrally, like tapping into, I think a lot of my work plays with dreams and things that come to me in ways that are not always discernible via language, but come to me via breath or via sound or via scream. So really sort of projecting and not even decoding, just letting that exist in the space. Yeah.
I see resonance.
I'll go. Speaking, and my what I resonated with was what you were talking about with ancestors and your lineage, and so I am a documentarian, mostly working with digital video, and but I think the lineage that I come out of is watching my grandfather Cecil Carter take photos when I was a kid, and I think just now, he's been dead for 20 years, but I think just now realizing the importance of what he was doing as a documentarian and an archivist, and looking at how these photos are so precious to me now, is a big part of my practice and recognizing that. So yeah.
I like that we're just gonna start out real easy. but we never, ever, ever do nothing nice and easy. But we're gonna start out nice. Okay, I'm silly. That is part of my lineage. I am on the tail end of the baby boomer generation. And so I am strongly influenced as an artist by the Black arts movement, and I come out of Chicago. So I was really, those were my artists who participated actively in that movement, like from Afro-Cobra and Muntu Dance Company, et cetera, were part of my growing up, AACM, So I was always around that energy, and I just was like exhilarated, right? And so, I'm also coming out of the lineage of organizing and movement building. And also at that time, there was a big movement around Black studies at the university. So I was surrounded, my father was a professor. So I was surrounded by a lot of students who were pushing for these ideas around Black studies. And so for me, that kind of connection at like 10 when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and then at 12 when I read Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, I was like, I want to be a revolutionary artist. And so since that point, I think I've been trying to many different ways, because the question of revolution is an evolving question, right? But I've been trying to really look at what that means in my practice, in my relationships, and make sure that we're not coming up against a trite kind of didactic way of expressing something as broad as, say, a black liberation project, right? And so at this point, as an abolitionist, I was one of the founding members of Critical Resistance, and really looking at these ideas of hierarchy and carceral landscapes. I started really thinking as a painter and a site-specific installation artist about how can we transform space in practice. And so a lot of my work situated in Black abstraction is about reclaiming space. And so my paintings are very large, they're double-sided, they're really textured, they're bright Kool-Aid colors, as Afrikovic said. They get in your face, they shine, they do all the things, because to some degree I'm trying to make more of a sculptural space if we're dealing with objects, right? And so I think there's that tension between especially in the Black arts movement, between representational art and abstraction. And I'm feeling that the more, as a free jazz kind of idea, the more that we're situated in abstraction, the broader our imaginations can go. So I'm really trying to get there, and I'm so glad you shouted out Mary Lovelace O'Neill, whose birthday was yesterday, who's on this campus. Who was on this campus. Total fangirl. Total fangirl. Anybody got her number? oh, I'm so scared. Oh my God. Let me get the number. Jane Cortez, bell hooks, right? Like the list goes on, the ways when we think, I'm gonna stop in a second, but when we think about Black feminism as applied through Black abstractions, then I'm really thinking about strategic abstraction, like how do we make this space, this interior space, a new space? So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Now, if I'm doing it well, the people will know, or, whatever. It's an experiment. I'm trying it.
All right. Hallelujah. I'm so invigorated. Well, I think my real work has been hidden from me for my whole life. Only recently, as I surrender these signifiers of the things that I am named for as a creator, I'm starting to see this intersection that my life is of many lineages of peoples of the earth. And I'm feeling like the real work that I am here doing probably will remain illegible on the surface, but I recognize that part of it is about these technologies that I inherit as a African ancestored person actually flowing to tend the traumatized, abandoned European ancestors and work at the root of this trauma of being unrooted. And I feel that it's not a popular practice, and it's probably not like legible through portrayal in any ways that it would move through my body. But I feel this kind of invitation from the intersection of my life to allow all of these technologies that have flown into my life through music and through these lineages of quote unquote jazz or freedoms of expression and self-inquiry, inviting them to flow and do this radical invitation and alchemical work with the forgotten ones that are not forgotten through the bodies of many of us and through many systems of white supremacy, occupation, and brutality. So I'm saying this with this kind of glossed over stare into the distance because it shocks me too. and I'm uncomfortable with it, and I see why it's been hidden until I'm 37, but I feel that that's actually my work. And it's not going to be named on the marquee or the name of an album, but that's my work.
Well, I feel grateful to feel gathered by all that has come, all that's been said thus far, and to feel recognized, to be able to collect myself through both being last to answer this question and through, the articulation and the kind of joints, articulating the joints, where I feel pieced together through your shares. So many threads came up from you all shares that made me think about what my work is, honestly. And Jazz, when you shared about your grandfather, I felt that I am in the tradition of growing up, being a descendant of Black, mad people, both angry and disturbed and elsewhere and elsewhen. And my grandfather passed in 2020 and has really been guiding my spirit about illegibility, about being willing to be in my own logic and to trust that logic, and permit something that is distinct to my spirit to come through. And something that I always share that he said to me in a conversation when he was waxing about his PhD in metaphysics that he had. Oh no, not, actually this time it wasn't about the PhD in metaphysics. It was a PhD in, I can't remember what the language was. It was something, he had many PhDs that he would speak to that he had because he had his own merit. And in this moment where he was talking to me about one of his PhDs, he spoke to, at the end of that share, saying that it wasn't because he was stupid, but that it took him a long time to refresh his memory that he was Black. So I feel like a lot of my work is about refreshing my memory, particularly through my relationship to the earth. I feel like a lot of my work is at the intersections of Black pastoral care, both pastoral in the sense of ministry and abolitionist theologies, and just being close to God and Sabbath, and also in gathering people coming from Black ministers, and folks who hosted people and held sanctuary for people. And also pastoral as in the sense of being out with animals and being out with the land and dedicating my life to taking care of place as they take care of me, particularly the land that I co-steward with my partner in Kashaya Pomo territory is what is taking care of me at this moment and is my work.
Thank you. Oh, wow. See, y'all get it now, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I see your dream.
Well, I kind of, before moving into a question about creative practice, I'm kind of wondering if y'all would riff a bit on two words that just came up, or two concepts that just came up: free jazz and illegibility. So I'm going to just put that on the floor and see who picks it up.
I hate that word, legibility, okay? Someone described our work as early on, not early on, but like first time I heard the term, she was using it not in a positive way to say that my work was illegible, right? And so I was like pondered by this. I was like, legible to who? What are you talking about? Why are you talking like that, first of all? And then from there, what do you mean, right? And so, like, I really am inspired by what you're saying, because also the people that I'm, like, trying to stay in relationship with, and I like what everybody was talking about. I like what everybody was talking about. Like, at one point, I was like, I think I'm becoming the slavery artist, right? Because, like, all my stuff is like cotton that I've picked and sugar cane I've cut, and I'm like so feeling the enslaved black woman, and where was her agency, right? And like all my work keeps going there. And so I was like, they just have to be in the room. And I'm like, whether they're legible or not, I see them, right? And so that's a value, right? So I don't know. Like, so yeah, who's reading it? Anybody else? Take the other one.
I don't know if this is on. Was somebody about to speak? Oh, I'm thinking about the two words in and of themselves. You know, I got to be in a room once with this group called Post Commodity. I believe it's led by Ravin Chacon and two other mestizo and indigenous artists. And the word, somebody asked for a definition of freedom. And so all these beautiful, you know, people of color on the room were like offering their definitions. And around the middle of the circle, this brother from Ravin Chacon's band was like, freedom is a colonial term.
Right.
It was like that word has been used to genocide my people. So that word itself, we're borrowing the word to try to describe something that's coming from elsewhere. And the term itself asks for the concept to contort to the service of the term. And then the word jazz is another word that is an invention. It did not emerge from the communities creating the music. It was put on to feel like we have the capacity to signify what that is. So even those terms, I feel like we use them like a passport. We do. To be like, okay, I'm able to enter this territory and get the resources I need to move from point A to point B undisturbed. So I'm gonna put the signifier up that says free jazz, and y'all can sit back and not try to tell me what this is or isn't. And I also think that's a really joyous way to engage with these terms and these signifiers that didn't emerge from our own creative practices, like allowing them to be a technology and a plaything that we can put and move around when we want and are not beholden to. That's what I have to say.
That's right. That's right. Because it's about, is the sound, and I use the language jazz, and I might, like AACM musicians are like, we're not jazz, it's not, don't say that. I was like, what about the tunes? They're like, no, don't really don't say that. But it's like, but this idea of it giving us space to move around is why I think we can play in there with that sonics. But the language of jazz or opera, the words, right, is for the art, for the marketplace. It's not, that's what, you know, I'm hearing you say in terms of like, and I agree with that if that's what you're saying, in terms of, that's not what people who were practicing it named it. You know, that's what the marketplace named it. So.
Maxine, you got some sauce for that dish? Okay, thank you. I honor that. Well, Kai just offered opera, which is another like signifier that I think through my engagements with the work of Gallery of the Streets got exploded for me. And a big part of the thinking behind this curation was being in conversations where I remember Kai saying, like, you know, we have to reach towards the operatic as something big enough to hold Blackness-ish, big-ish enough, right? And then that same kind of refrain came up in some of the work I was engaging from Brontë and Esperanza, and then I was sitting somewhere and talking to Exene, and like you were also thinking through the idioms of opera. So I'm wondering if there's a way, if y'all would like to comment on what that signifier allows for you, if it's distinct or different than what free jazz is opening up.
Yeah, I can say for me, opera is very much a creolization of different forms, and I think it's very, again, tied to slavery and this combination of, or existing in white spaces, and the way in which you can take up space and maneuver. I think of Jessie Norman and the bigness and the vastness of her voice, but it was always opera. It was still opera. It was still never hers culturally. And for me, I don't think opera is supposed to be ours culturally in that way. I think opera does like rub up against me and causes me friction because I am the slave. And I'm not African, I'm not European, I'm in that like interstices space. And I think that, at least for me, is why opera challenges me, but also can excite me in moments, because it's like, okay, what is the violence that's going on there? That's the violence that I come from, though. Like, I am a part of that violence, right? Like, I am a, in many ways, mixed race Black woman, right? Coming from slavery, coming from these traditions. So my involvement, my understanding, even the language used in opera, like we're still using Western notation. I haven't seen an opera where we're not doing that. So yeah, I think really sort of, I don't even want to say interrogating. I think just really sitting with what opera actually is, for me right now, is very important.
I'm thinking about Esperanza and I talking about how there ain't no way this kind of sound, like that register, didn't begin with a Black woman's voice, where you could know, like, you could know something so intimately, like through the experience of your flesh, that you could go to that vibration and sing at that register to go to that place. I just don't think that came from white people. That's what I'm trying to say. Even though there is both this kind of, the way I think as like opera as an institution is very associated with like class. Like it's like, you know, these things around you fall asleep, or you pay a lot of money, or there's, you know, where you sit that kind of names your status. There's so much associated with that. And then when I think about like what's underneath, like the underbelly of it, it just feels so, it does feel so Black to me, to be able to, with all of your body and spirit, more than vocalize, bodilize, but corporealize, you know, it's just so big to like collaborate with sound in that way. That's so powerful. And I just want to, I've been so interested about the etymology of opera being work, which brings me to the kind of questions around labor. Yeah, and yeah, what is that about?
Yeah, I think when I think of opera, I also think of this space where I don't belong. And I think when I joined Gallery of the Streets, or we started this project, you know, Kai kind of framed it like opera is a folk art originally. It's for the people. It's a traveling theater, and people could learn stories or hear cultural traditions from this genre. And then I think it evolved. But I think what's so interesting about what Gallery of the Streets is doing is that we make the opera absurd. You know, it's not and abstract. I think it's not necessarily a traditional opera, but I'm gonna throw it to you in a second. You know, but we use sound and visuals to kind of abstract the genre and also create a space for people to actively engage. And I think that really transforms the what traditionally we know as opera. Kick it, Kate.
No, okay, I talk a lot, right? I'm an Aquarius with a Gemini rising. Chatty, chatty, chatty. This is my shit. Intellectual musing. So I'm apologizing up front to everybody. Feel free to cut me off, jump in, but I do have thoughts about some of these things. Okay. Okay, so yes. I agree with things that are said, and I think I love what you just said. Like Abby Lincoln and Max Roach triptych. Yeah? And her breathing and all that is operatic. My character in our visual opera is a DJ, so I like to play the tunes. And so that we tend to start a lot with that, and it gets real heavy if people have heard it. And that's operatic. Whale songs. You know what I mean? That's operatic. So like that blood, that black blood, right? Or that blood that's tied to the bottom, you know, I think it is to not be named, right? We did a piece called Echo Hybridity, and one of our people who we collaborate, one of the members of Gallery of the Streets, just sat in the corner of the room and just like was
Wailing?
She was wailing, and I didn't really know what was happening, right? Because I'm like, so I walked by and I was like, what the hell, Wendy? And I didn't realize that she was like in this character. Her character, what was her character?
They Who Hold the Bones.
They Who Hold the Bones. So she was just sitting in this posture, and she takes space, right? She takes space. So she's just sitting, and she's got this really deep voice from the gut, and she's just wailing it, and it's so intense, just the voice, you know, not necessarily what it's saying, but the ability to go into it and bring it out is something I'm like into with the opera, not the narrative. You know, I don't know. You making one?
You know, yes, it's making us too. I mean, it's unmaking us in a lot of ways. When I walked past the Met the last time in my life, I was curious to see who funded it. Thinking about this institution as like, you know, pinnacle representation of like opera in the United States. And I was looking at all these names that were embossed gold off of a granite wall, like a marble wall. And all of their names were like these protruding words in gold. And it was, you know, oil companies and investment firms and banks. And suddenly I started thinking about the desperation to encounter the undomesticated and the sacred. But it's equal parts desperation to encounter and to feel in control of those forces as you're encountering them. And I started to feel in that moment that opera was a really specific design, like a really specific technology to make a curated encounter for wealthy people who have strategically removed themselves from a real relationship with the undomesticated and the sacred and recreated for themselves this portal through which they can encounter it according to their terms, their story, and their ownership. And right in that moment, the whole medium started to feel so different. And I started to think, what is it about this way of human voicing, bodying, that is so magnetic to structures of power? And I feel that maybe part of it is one of the most profound things we can do with our body, I think, adjacent to giving birth. It is such an unbelievably powerful activity just in the body. And I get a sense that it's terrifying and that people can really sense that latent power of human potential, like moving through the body. And I'm so excited for the ways that I'm seeing that spirit technology or body technology of the medium itself, like leaking out of the bottom of that very hard monarchistic system of development and permeating the community, like permeating our lives, permeating our stories, our dreams, our shared space. And just to use one of the things in the world I learned through brontë, this idea of the terma, it feels to me like opera is this terma. It's like a technology of humanity that had to be fugitive through these halls to keep developing, to keep growing, to keep finding what else we could find in it. And now it's like done with being held by the names on that marble wall. It's like, no, you don't get to occupy me and move me to your designs anymore. Like, I'm gonna go move where I need to go, and you figure out how the fuck to get access to the sacred and the undomesticated on your own.
There you go. This Esperanza, you bringing in the Met, it has me thinking about another one of the threads that started to see this vision for me was being at the house of our elder in residence of the Black Studies Collaboratory, Miss Daphne Muse. And on the wall, when you enter her kitchen, she had framed this like Japanese silk program that her father acquired through a service occupation, I believe, it was like the silk printed program for the opening of the Met. And looking at that, she showed us that it featured Leontine Price. It was Alvin Ailey's choreographic debut. So I was sitting there stunned by the ways, like with, Kai Barrow's definition of opera in my head, looking towards the kind of gilded institution of opera and realizing that like Black creative labor had always been a part of that choreography. And I think what you just raised about like this very specifically shaped container which empowered white folks in a imperialist, white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society allowed themselves access to the sacred. And in this American context, it necessitated that Black woman's voice and that Black queer man's body. And I think that is something that is still teaching me and was part of what drove me to bring y'all together. I know, right? I'm thinking, so my next kind of discussion anchor is that kind of like shivers in me was about like wondering how you all would describe like the textures of your creative process. In the ways, and it's come up a little bit, like I'm thinking about presences and hauntings, but in a way that's not, the like white ghost story, but of what it means to be kin with your dead folks, and how that shows up in creative practices. But I'm wondering if you all might riff on or share what you feel comfortable sharing, right? Because not everything is meant to be known. What the kind of like textures and feels of your particular practices have been, or what your collaboratory processes are, like the texture of the work that you do with others.
For me, that question is a little bit difficult, and I'm trying to. I think I'm in a transition with my work, trying to pull it out of a digital space where, you have access to so much, and you can take an unlimited amount of photos or an unlimited amount of video, but I think sometimes digital lacks texture and depth in a way, even though it's a cheap way to archive things. And so I think my practice as somebody who is documenting and starting to archive Black radical traditions, and specifically with Gallery of the Streets, I think moving more towards analog film creates this different texture and also different visceral relationship that is that slows you down, and then also offers a texture that's bright. I don't know. I'm not really sure how to answer your question, but I think for me, that's where I'm going, and I appreciated that question because it helps me think about the making of the work. And I think, with our work too, the Gallery of the Streets is layered. I think that's also a challenge, is in this kind of way that I grew up, everything is immediately gratifying. Like, I see something and I realize what it is, and I'm like, oh, I got that. But when you sit with work that is, abstract and illegible, you have to really sit with it and take your time and kind of go into a place of unknowing and be comfortable with that. And so that's kind of where I am with that question.
Back to the rhythm. Okay. That's a hard question. I had to think about that a bit. I don't know what you mean. And so it was a good challenge, right? I thought about it. I was like, what is the texture? Because my work, I try to be very textured, right? So ideally, I would have loved to be able to spread dirt here. I would. And I would get it up. But I like to deal with the materials of the matter. I like to work with matter. And then I like to work with space. So matter and space. And I'm trying to get more and more in that direction, let go of the object, right? And so I think my textures are very tactile. So right now I'm working a lot with cotton. And if you all come to the workshop, I've brought it on the flight, which was probably hilarious. The way it seeped out of the suitcase. I know the TSA people were like, what the? So I brought a big suitcase of cotton that I've picked so that we can actually, if we want, engage that. It's a really intense visual for those who have never seen, cotton, which grows everywhere. I've been working a lot with sugar cane. We went and chopped some up. And so I'm really trying to put myself in the position of the labor that Black women, enslaved Black women engaged, so that as I'm working with all the materials, which were engaged by enslaved Black women diasporically, I'm having a sense of what that labor feels like in my body. And so it's a performance of the labor, because I'm not nobody's standing behind me with a rifle. And, I understand the obvious limitations of that. But the process of gathering, sorting, and then reconceptualizing in a way that might really sit on the edges of some kind of a palimpsest, right? I also work with collage. Is a way that I think I'm able to smudge and peel and pile and just have this really physical relationship with materials that then translate into either spaces, paintings, or sculptures.
I just want to pause because I hear the bells, which signifies that it's noon, and I know that Esperanza might have to depart, or? I can say along with them. Okay, absolutely. Just checking in. Thank you. That was a time warp. No, where are we? And I guess also I'll mention there were cards on your seat. So if you have a question brewing, please write it down and then pass it towards Lee Rayford in this lovely jumpsuit right here. And then, yeah, sorry for that technical interruption, but please come in.
Yeah, I'll actually. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'll keep going. It's funny you mentioned traveling with cotton. I've traveled with a lot of dirt before, and TSA is always like, "What is this? What do we do with it?" Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I like to use dirt and soil as a archive, as a tool to access ancestors and other planes. And I think so on the first question, or second, as far as collaboration, I really like to make sure I'm collaborating with spirit. I don't feel like personally I have anything deeply interesting to say without that sort of backing behind me. So I usually I have to sleep a lot. I have to take care of myself. I have to pray to specific, exactly. And do all my ritual, altar work. So then I can sit down and it's okay, this is what I'm talking about. This is what's coming to me. This is what feels like it needs to be expressed. So always being in collaboration in that sense feels really vital. I think as far as texture, again, I go back to dirt. I think I've always been obsessed with dirt as a kid, the feeling of it in my hands, making it wet, watching it dry, putting it in my mouth, really feeling how it swivels around, kind of cuts your teeth, things like that. I think that relates a lot to my work because there's a groundedness, there's a rootedness that I'm always trying to access. I'm a Capricorn, I'm there always. But then there's this other part of me that is transient and airy and kind of open to being blown away or destroyed or vulnerable in a sense. And I like the way that dirt in moments can be very compact, but then when you kind of get down to it, it's nitty and gritty and small and you can't really control it or contain it. And I think that usually fuels my work.
We can talk more about eating dirt too. I'm here for it.
I'm just feeling brontë here next to me and thinking about thinking about creative process and collaboratory process, and I'm remembering or touching into the texture of my own humanity or personhood, or the constellation of beliefs and practices or ways of engaging or relating that make up this person of me. And so much of what feels like is being worked with is that essence. And I just think of so much undoing or unraveling or unexpected exposure of things, elements of how I am and move, and that feels like the primary texture, and it can feel really terrifying to feel sometimes very exposed, sometimes exposing my own internalized prejudice or patriarchy or insensitivities or brutalities even, and that it feels like the creative practice is like a working with those elements that come to light through the kind of inevitable vulnerability and personal exposure of creating and collaborating. And I think I'm touching into that partially because you're sitting next to me, and I feel that, so much of our creative process and this project, that we're probably working on many projects in multiple dimensions, but it's really felt like a crafting and evolving of the texture of myself, And the things that grow out of the creative process are like little expressions or portraits or radiations from that main texture, and it feels really terrifying a lot of the time. And somebody spoke about, being invited to sit with that unknown space, and it feels like really that is also a texture of the creative practice of like not knowing what you're going to encounter about yourself and what somebody else might encounter first, and then you get to work with. And actually, newly, I want to say, coming from a practice of being an instrumentalist, which is a lot of alone time, that this creative practice and collaboratory space are feeling like completely enmeshed, interwoven. And I'm really grateful for that evolution, and I pray for the spiritual endurance or softness to lean further into that way of being in creative practice.
I get to collect again, so thanks, guys. Yeah, just from the tail end of what you just shared, I feel so grateful that so much of my processes are collaboratory, be it with other Black femmes or Black queer folks, or the land that I live with, or animals or spirit, ancestors. I feel all of that. I feel great. And the other, I feel very much that my practice is also about collaborating with otherness, also as a mixed Black person, and being curious about what it is to be with friction. And I know somebody in here knows the author of that text for Taj. Anybody? I don't know what their name is.
I don't know the last name, but Kiguru.
Okay, thank you. The text is about like both frottage as like a word that means like rubbing up against somebody in public on accident, kind of liking it, non-consensual. But it's also about like, I'm so sorry, this is what the book is about. But it's also about, don't do that. But it's also about the kind of ways that Black folks across the diaspora have kind of been like lumped together, like as though we're one being. And the friction of, they use this language of the friction of our intimacy, of like the friction of our distinctions, and the ways we come to know ourselves rub up against one another, of how we understand our own beingness. And that Blackness is not monolithic, so it's not gonna have this, it's gonna be, actually when you spoke to the texture, my texture felt very corrugated in the work, but where there's crevices and cracks and fractures, where so much is then available. So I'm grateful for that kind of, that place. And I was thinking a lot about, with just touch, not that touch, not for Taj, but I was thinking about just a couple of weekends ago getting to go to, I'm in this class right now called Fleece to Garment. That's so cool. Working from all of the processes, from shearing the sheep to working with skirting the fleece, to carding the wool, to spinning the yarn, to making the garment. And I was touching the sheep wool, and it really was like that moment of, there was a lot of white women at the class, and we were all touching this sheep wool that I imagine you know what it felt like. And I didn't like them touching it with me because it was so, the hair, the highlights were even my color. Like it was so, in the crimp of the wool was my same color. And and we were all like making contact, and there was something about that though, about us both doing that and me feeling this is an animal that I feel a type of way about, as like we're touching a black person's hair. That's how I feel in my body. It's registering in that way. So there's something also about my creative process that I feel is about blurring blackness and animality and interspecies kinship, where I've really felt that, I really felt connected to the sheep. And I'll make some bundles. That's gonna be, that's gonna be my garment, is making some bundles for some braids, which none of them, yeah. No, when I shared in the class that I wanted to do that, and it was so clear, there was no there wasn't that recognition of what that meant to do that. So I think some of my other texture is about that's okay, and that I can say it now with people who know what it means, but being willing to go to sites of friction for, that closeness.
Wow, so much just like hit me in the face. Like I feel like somebody just flicked holy water in my face. But I was thinking as you were talking, Brontë, about your encounter with our sheepkin, about this Lucille Clifton quote, being property once myself, I have a feeling for it. And how so much of that, and I know it's been taken up in a book that's probably great, by Joshua Bennett. I haven't read it, so I don't, but brilliant people who write poems too. But I'm thinking about just what it means to really live into that relation, particularly in the body, in a racialized and gendered body, and how you come into that relation through craft. I'm also thinking about how so much of this kind of self-facing and self-effacing work of collaboration is so much a part of what abolition necessitates in this moment. And I think that's something that has sharpened and grown in me through my work with Gallery of the Streets, through the study that we've done, and also through the dirt laying and toting and rock gathering and pallet shipping. And I think that there's something about, I know there's a quote that's right on the outside of my brain about how abolition is as much about creating and growing and building anew as it is about tearing down. But I'm thinking with you all, and I think I'm so moved. This was an unexpected part of my dream, that it would just so perfectly align with the work something like the Abolition Democracy Fellowship Program is doing, or even just, the way that, we've talked, Kai, about how you have been doing this work for so long and are in this moment where it's on the news, people talking about abolishing the prison industrial complex. But even that, there's this kind of a fervor that is very excited to demolish, which is necessary, but can overlook the kind of friction and tenderness and the necessary, the word coming to my mind is the necessary vulnerabilities, but that's not all the way right, but of the actual work of building, creating, and envisioning anew. And I would love to just hold some space as we wait for questions together. Are there questions? Oh, okay. Oh, people out there in live stream land, please type your questions in the chat. I really feel like Oprah right now. It's giving. Understood. So some housekeeping. Exene Sky. Claps into One more time?
Are you doing pronouns too?
Oh, I don't want to pronounce that for y'all, but I could just let y'all introduce yourselves and not have my moment.
So yeah, I'm Exene Sky, she, her.
I'm Jazz Franklin. Pronouns are black, she, her.
I'm Kai Lumumba Barrow. I wish I could be so cool to have a pronoun like black. It's she, her. Boring.
Esperanza, spalding, and pronouns are she, her.
Brontë, velez, they, them.
Thank you, and thank you, Ishar.
Just came up thinking about creating the I'm getting a feeling when we speak about creating the new. It makes me think of other practices of sustaining, and you spoke about something, Jazz, of this like immediacy of the digital era and feeling like, oh, I can engage with it and I got it, and like the cycle's complete. And I'm by many, many pathways, I keep being invited to reckon with the responsibility of inviting new spaces of vulnerability and like really sinking into the relationship and the commitment of devising new spaces for being in new ways of vulnerability and accountability with each other, and how I tend to bring to the creation of new spaces the same kind of beginning, middle, end mentality of like consumerism, that like I extended myself, I got what I wanted and it's done. And I don't have a point, I'm just noticing that the welling up of that awareness of like longing for encounters with versions of continuity and ways that creators of these new alternative spaces and ways of holding each other can model and have modeled. Like maybe I even have to give up other things that I'm used to investing energy or receiving, validation from or whatever, to remain present and remain in a commitment of sustaining with all its evolutions this newfound or new developed space.
Well, I do have 2 cards here with some questions on it. The first, what kinds of ways has your work/labor helped you /us to evade capture? And perhaps this is an opening to think with the Maroons, who are a part of that, constellation of the formerly enslaved, the enslaved that are with us, that I have seen and felt and experienced in all of your work in different ways.
I think playful. When you think about Black abstraction, I'm gonna do a movement person thing. You know how old movement people walk around with books and things. So I'm walking around with a book, right, that I just read, and I really think it's important. I'm reading. And I really think it's important for us to cite our sources and try to encourage each other to, read these things if we can. But I'm so excited about this book, Black Post-Blackness, and by Margot Natalie Crawford. And her second chapter is called The Politics of Abstraction. And so she talks about, this idea of strategic abstraction, and that part of abstraction also has a satire and playfulness. And I think about people like David Hammons, right, who is like amazing, right? And his book, his installation piece, Concerto in Black and Blue, right, where the people would come in with flashlights to be able to check what Blackness is in movement, right? And so just playing with things usually not. We rarely are in museum and contained spaces. We tend to be in the field. We tend to do a lot of exploration. I, as a painter, refuse to put paintings on the wall, which is why they're double-sided and take space. I won't have them constrained. I want them to move out. So to try to work with a two-dimensional object that can actually also be in motion and movement with the people who are engaging it. So you have to move with it, right? I think those are ways we evade capture. And then I think our experiences of like, oh my God, gathering information as participatory research. We've had quite some interesting experiences in places like
Mariana Federal Prison.
Yeah.
Mariana Federal Prison for women.
Right, so we walked into Mariana Federal Prison for Women, right? Like literally drove up, opened the door, walked into the prison, and there was like a custodial person, like a prisoner was sweeping, and nobody stopped us, me. And so I was like, excuse me? And he was like, you're not supposed to be in here, you're not supposed to be in here. I was like, shh. But just looking at how we can cross borders, you know, from Heathrow to prisons to, you know, just going into different hovels and holes, because the Maroons, when we went to visit the Maroons in Jamaica, we went to visit Maroons in Jamaica and just happened to find a conference of a gathering of international Maroons, because we were talking to people on the street. Wow. Right? And they were like, oh, you must be, because you know, the patriarchy, hey, baby, is that your mother? Is that your daughter? What is this? And so, you know, and so we said we're looking for Maroons in order to get the patriarchy back. And they said, oh, well, you need to go to such and such. And so we just ended up at this place. So I think this kind of being open, being playful, like our way of, who looks at us and thinks of us as at all threatening?
A playful subterfuge.
Right. So that's how we, I think, evade capture and still try, like living in this heterotopia. Like we're in this place of miserableism, as the surrealists say. And at the same time, we're also living our marvelous selves, right? And we're also reproducing and living our marvelous selves, relationships with other marvelous ones, right? And I think that's how we keep that moving, right? Okay, you like that? You've been dropping science stuff, for real now. But I do think that's part of what we're all in the work of doing, which is why it's so amazing to be like talking with you all. We just met for the first time, so I'm kind of geeked. Like artists, Black artists. So.
No, Kai, I really like that answer. I think particularly the playfulness. I feel like that's something I engage in my practice when it comes, but I think for me, how I evade capture is really sort of diving deep into like the mania of my own mind and really like facing the darkness in my own body, my own mind, and just really staying right there. I think a lot of the work I do is like getting uncomfortable with like, yes, I am ill, I am not well, like I am not comfortable, I am not happy, I am upset, my body cannot hold these emotions, what do I do? Yeah, and just staying right there. I think that's why like Nina Simone was so important to me, to kind of hear her speak about the ways like, yeah, I'm not well, I'm not happy, like I don't like any of this, and that's okay. And to kind of end on that note too, right? Because I mean, she did, and I feel like that's important, and I feel like that's a large part of her legacy that's trying to like kind of glossed over, but like she wasn't happy. And that's okay, like it's okay to sit in those moments. I think Buddhism is something that's really become very important to me, and again, this idea of sitting before you even get to the point of like transcending or transmuting. And I think so much of our process is like, oh, let's get to the like gratification. Let's get to the feeling good. Let's get to the, you know, being able to synthesize this. And I think for me, it's really just like, no, sit in the emotion, understand it, feel it, like really let yourself like face yourself and see what comes from that. And that to me feels like, okay, if I can handle my own crazy, then that's freedom for me. That's like saving me.
Can we still hop on this question? Okay. Thank y'all for what you shared. I feel so thrilled to be in conversation, even though we're in a line. Hey, because I haven't got to make eye contact with you. Yeah, I'm thinking about like these like quite literal ways that Black people are captured. And I'm thinking about this moment to how I'm learning what evasion of capture might also look like, is not going alone and not being alone, both spiritually and physically. We were filming a project called Between Starshine and Clay with my collective Led to Life, and we were out in Point Reyes, Coast Miwok territory in California, and there was a ceremonialist present to hold this ritual filming, and our work where we are transforming guns into ritual objects and tools. And we were working with these materials in the forest, and women who were joining us who had lost their children to police brutality in Stockton. We've just had just been in a ritual together and collectively of offering this limpia to a gun that had been donated to us. And we were in a clearly like ritual space. And the ritualist I didn't know had to leave early to go pick up her son from Oakland. And so we come out of that space, we're deeply like raw. And we come out of that space, someone has left early, the ritualist had to go, we're rushing to catch the sunset for the next scene. And while we're on the route there, one of the brothers who is a drummer for the film is outside of his car with a park ranger. And we're like, why is he out of his car? And there's this, moment between the sunset and scarcity and one day and no money to film and all these people. It took so much to get all these Black people to Point Reyes, if you've ever been there. There's no Black people there. And then to have this moment of stopping, particularly by Denise Friday and Deion Smith, who are organizers and also mothers who've been impacted, to stop us and to stop what was happening. And I had, right before that moment, even before I knew what was about to happen, I was having a panic attack coming out of that space. I didn't even know what was happening. It was just like a spiritual attack. And I was wailing and like couldn't catch my breath. And then when I looked up, that's when I saw that the brother was outside of the car. And I just learned so much from that moment about closing and going from one place to the next, of ritual closing, of sealing space, of vows of safety with one another, of saying, like, I'm not gonna let you go alone. We're gonna go together. We're letting people know where we're going, both spiritually and like physically, like just straight up. But also when we're going somewhere spiritually, that we're letting one another know, so that we don't get taken by something physical, be it the police, or be it like some demonic ass forces, like I've learned when I've tried to go alone to do spiritual encounters or re-encounter like these ideas of spirituality, because we've been so deeply separated. When I've gone alone, I've been harmed. and just learning about that, like, slowness, yeah, together.
Both the questions were aligned, I think, in this question of what escapes. The second question has a more like pointed ask around like what does it mean or look like to create what they call emancipatory art in corporate environments. Another thing I learned from Kai is the term art industrial complex. But I guess it's so, I'm very grateful that you all have joined me here and have come in response to the call and have brought your gifts and all that means. I'm really like, my brain is like fervently searching for a way to close, but it doesn't want to close.
Well, I mean, I don't know what it's like to make art in corporate environment. I don't want to be that rude. All environments are corporate, right? Like we live in capitalism, right? Like, so there's always some form of carcerality, right? We went and when we picked sugarcane, Ra, Jazz, me, and a couple other people, when was that? Like recently?
Yeah. November.
Yeah. And there was, we did Donaldsonville, Louisiana, and there's a lot of plastic plants, right, that are in that environment, which is why this area is known as Cancer Alley, right? And the Hurricane Ida hit the area really hard, and so now you have people who are dying from cancer, who are fighting to keep living on that land that is theirs originally, but has been poisoned by these corporations. And even the sugarcane is not, obviously the sugarcane is less buoyant, it's not as sweet. And so when we go and steal their profits, we feel that's what it's like to be working in that space. Not to be a problem, but I did have a show recently in New Orleans, and we laid dirt all over the floor, right? And scratched up the walls and just like kind of reconfigured the space. And so now, they had to like rebuild the whole floor. Exactly. And there was like, okay, is this being recorded? I saw a worm. I was like, I'm not going to kill it. So there's ways I think about our ancestors who worked in the kitchens, who worked in the big house, who were always figuring out ways to subvert and subterfuge the institution that they're within. And I think so we're always working in corporate, carceral environments, while again, at the same time, trying to work in a space that dares ourselves to be, I love what you said, dares ourselves to be closed in by these monsters and we're seeping out.
Absolutely. Wow, I just feel such deep energy, adoration. I feel inspired. I'm so beyond grateful for everything that just opened up, and I'm thankful for folks who came to witness this convergence, which I'm certain in all of my being is not the last. So with that, I just invite us to close this container. I'm just thinking about, actually, Brontë, would you dedicate the merits? Thank you.
Well, thank you for organizing this space and convening all of us. And I felt all of you from moments of laughter and applause or furrowed brows or smiles underneath masks. So I'm glad we got to connect in some way. And this practice comes to me through Miyakota Taylor from a body of work called Fierce Allies, and through Buddhism, to dedicate the merits of any joy that came from this time, any liberation that came from this time, to send it out for those who are not gathered with us. So if there's anyone in your heart you might feel would be blessed by this conversation today who wasn't here, you can just think of them in your spirit. And if you want to, you could repeat after me. I'll say the phrase first so you know what we're gonna say. May any positivity generated be given away to all of life for the sake of freedom. And then I'll say it again, and if you want to repeat, you can. May any positivity generated be given away to all of life for the sake of freedom. Ashe, thank you.
Thank you.